That means that regular people are going to have more money than governments
Fuck.
because their money is inflating. It's going down in value. Bitcoin's going up in value. Do you understand why? When you have money you can't fuck with, it's like having a nuclear weapon in your pocket and telling the guy, go ahead and fuck with me and I'll blow you up.
Mm.
That's kind of how we see it.
Here he is, Mr. Jack Kruse. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. How's things in El Salvador, my friend?
Been interesting. We've had a lot of interesting weather because of all this solar business going on, but it was very, very beautiful this morning and this afternoon. The clouds come in every afternoon. The clouds come in because of all the cosmic radiation that's in the air. So it's kind of an interesting time.
Yeah, yeah, tell me about it. Well, you'd be pleased to know that here in Australia, here, mate, where we've just gone 6 a.m. in the morning, it's 11 degrees, it's windy as fuck, and we're in the dead of winter. So, yeah, you're probably blessed with beautiful weather over there, nice and warm climate. So
Oh
you're
yeah,
lucky.
it's pretty warm here. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. How long have you been living in El Salvador for?
4 years.
Yeah, nice. And can you explain to me? I know we're going to get into this a little later, but when you made that move to go to El Salvador, what was your main catalyst for getting out of town, so to speak?
Well, it's probably the same catalyst that I would tell you as an Aussie. I mean, the thing that you don't know about me, for 20 years, I've been teaching people about decentralized medicine, but I knew in all the Commonwealth countries what was coming, but I also knew in my own country, based on what happened, with politics there, that the United States is no longer free. The money is failing. And you see what's going on currently right now in Los Angeles, where all shit's breaking loose. Well, what happens when that happens all over the country? Do you want to be in a country like that? And to be honest with you, um, my timing may have been off in terms of 4 years early, but I think everything that I thought was going to happen has happened. And I live in the freest country in the world now, which is El Salvador.
Mhm.
Also happens to be the safest country in the world. Like I don't have to worry about the random things that you have to worry about, that people in the States have to worry about, or people certainly in Europe. I mean, they're going to jail now over tweets. They just threw a minister in jail for preaching out of the Bible on the streets. So, when you start to see that kind of level of um, oversight from governments, you've got to make a decision yourself. How do you want to live your life? Because the decision, you can't look at the past and you can't look at the future. You got to look at what's going on right now. And 4 years ago, I made the diagnosis when Bukele. I had heard rumors he was going to make Bitcoin legal tender.
Mhm.
And if you understand Bitcoin, it's a decentralized money. That's actually a politician giving his people more freedom back, which is unheard of everywhere in the world. And yeah, there's some good things going on with Trump in the United States as it's reference to Bitcoin, but is everything in the United States going as I thought it would? Even the last time you and I talked, the answer is no, it's not.
Mm. Let's touch on that because I understand your motivation behind why you moved, and I see a few people doing it. I've spoken to a few people over the last couple of years that have moved out of Dodge, so to speak, and sort of gone to greener pastures or places that, for my liking, maybe 20 years behind, say, for example, Australia right now. So they're moving to parts of the world that are either making a change, like you mentioned, or they're so far behind that it's going to take a while for things to catch up. But we're not all in a position to do that. And I I guess I have a bit of a problem with, like, if we all moved to other areas, well, then you would have another problem with immigration or too many people going to the one area. If we all moved to Mexico, for example, like, it would be crowded as fuck eventually if everyone made the same move, which is not really solving the problem. Does that make sense?
I will tell you that you have to realize I understand why you're saying what you're saying, but you don't understand it totally from my aspect. I look at my tribe, true freedom fighters, as Bitcoiners. So I'm going to tell you that the things in the United States Constitution, Bill of Rights, that's the really good idea of the founding fathers when they told the king, fuck off and we're going to shoot you. And they got their freedom. It's not defined by the borders. You've grown up in a world where it's defined by the border. What I'm saying to you is when you have freedom maximalists and they own Bitcoin, they're going to be in Australia. They're going to be in the UK. They're going to be in Africa. They're going to be in Central America. And what happens then? We just created a sovereign country without borders. Why? Because I'll have cows that I'll sell to you and you'll sell me milk, or I'll buy water from you, or I'll get gas from you. And this was kind of a pipe dream maybe 10 years ago, but it's actually come to pass. Like now, Bitcoiners are building citadels all over the world. And we communicate kind of like you and I are communicating now. I mean, I just did a podcast with Marty Bent, who's a big Bitcoiner in Austin, Texas. And we had this conversation that you and I are having. He gets it because he's been doing this a long time as well, but he also sees the problems that I see. Like right now, Bitcoiners who are in the United States have to run the gauntlet with pediatricians over these shots because, technically by the time your baby's a year old, you have to get 3 COVID shots because of the vaccine schedule. Well, here's the problem. Bitcoin maximalists who are freedom maximalists, they don't want that. So what my job is now is to find pediatricians that we can shunt those people to. And the normies out there that kind of don't think that we can do what we're doing, watch us. That's the best part of Bitcoiners. When people tell us that we can't do shit, we're going to put our beer down and we're going to prove you wrong because we've been doing it for 10 years. And we're much further down the pike than you think. There's a lot of us. We're everywhere. And we're on all walks of life. Also, that's the other interesting thing. It's not just one group of people. It's not a bunch of nerds like it was in the beginning. Now you have professional people that are involved in this. And we all have the same understanding that decentralized health and wealth are fundamentally linked. And where you choose to live, like I'll give you, for example, I feel great with my decision here, but why did I do it? I did it actually for my kids, if you want to know the truth, because they thought I was crazy when I first made the move. Now, 4 years later, they're all like, I don't know how you saw this coming. And I said to them, I don't know how you didn't see it coming. And, when you see the things, because I don't think the United States is as bad as your country. I don't think it's any close to Canada or UK. But in the UK, when you're putting 1,000 people a month in jail for tweets, I mean, I don't know how you feel about it, but to me, this is supposed to be a free country in Britain. These are the people, that the misfits that became the United States, who are British people. There's no way we're going to put up with this. And I can tell you, in our country, we came very close to being communist. That's basically what Biden and Kamala were. They were part of that whole World Economic Forum thing, wanting to take guns away and this and that. And I know in your country, people don't really understand our fascination with guns, but that's actually how we shot at King George. Okay. That's the difference between you and us. And when you understand the mindset, Thomas Jefferson put the Second Amendment in, not for us to go hunting. It was to protect ourselves from the government, because they envisioned that if the King of England could do this to his subjects, why couldn't there be a future king or autocrat in the United States that could do the same thing to the people in the United States. That's why it's there. And, when Aussies laughed at us 20 years ago and they started to make fun of us about school shootings and things like that, they don't really understand that we're not like you and we don't want to be like you. We want to be the people in the Commonwealth that told the king to fuck off. And I have to be honest with you, that misfit, that savage mentality, I can promise you is in the Bitcoin community. And it's very interesting to me that the president that gets reelected, he doesn't get reelected without the Maha moms and without the Bitcoiners. And that's a pretty powerful statement. And, when most people in the States know my 2 cents on this, you guys probably don't. I wasn't a big Trump fan. I was really ready to vote for Bobby Kennedy for president. But when they joined forces and Trump came out and said, look, I'm going to not only let you have self-custody in Bitcoin, but I'm also going to actually back the U.S. Treasury market, I have to be honest with you, I was kind of stunned. And then the big litmus test for most Bitcoiners was the guy that got thrown in jail for Bitcoin, which was Silk Road. That was the first real use case for Bitcoin. We all told him, if you want our vote, you have to free Ross on day 1 or day 2. And to Trump's credit, what did he do? He pardoned him fully on day 2. So, I know people in Europe and Australia think Trump's an asshole, but I have to tell you, as far as I'm concerned right now, in the first 100 days, Trump has done everything that he promised that he would do. Now, Bobby Kennedy, on the other hand, who I would have put all my money on, would never, change his path of attack. He's completely flipped. But I think I understand why he's flipped. There's a lot of leverage around him, and the people they put around him, he's like a mosquito or a dinosaur egg in amber. And because they're trying to limit, what he can do. And the problem with that is the person that's kind of put the amber around him is Trump's chief of staff. And I understand why Trump is loyal to her, because, to be honest with you, he doesn't get reelected without her. And, she's a shill for Big Pharma. She sits on the board and works for 74 companies in the United States and all over the world, but most of them are linked to Big Pharma. And I guess what you would call her quid pro quo was getting to be chief of staff when he got in. And she was the one that's installed all the amber. Those would be like the Casey and Callie Means people. And I think the big one that you guys saw in Australia happen this week is when you saw Elon Musk basically get told by Susie Wiles, you got to get out of the West Wing. We want you not to have as big an influence with Trump. And then it devolved into, the issue between...
You're on the Epstein list.
Yeah, exactly. And it devolved into something different. But you have to remember, what did Elon fundamentally get pissed off about? He got pissed off about something that Bitcoiners care about, the debt. And the debt is unsustainable. And we have a guy who's the Speaker of the House who's a complete scam. He's a shill. He's just like a Fabian. He's just like Starmer, but he's wearing sheep's clothing. And people think that we don't know, like Bitcoiners don't know. No, we know, dude. That's why we Bitcoin. And when he came out last week and said, look, we don't think now's the time to cut the budget, we're going, dude, we're $37 trillion in debt. Like, that's what Doge was all about. It was about finding the waste and cutting it. And then when Elon decided not to hold his tongue and said, this is a joke. This is an absolute fucking joke that I did all this work and the people in Congress don't give a fuck. And the reason they don't give a fuck is because all the money that they were stealing, sending to Ukraine, was coming back to pay them off. So in effect, the people that are running the United States, and I mean Congress, because they're not really running it, the Department of Defense and Pentagon are, because we've been under a military coup since they killed JFK. But the people in Congress are actively stealing money from the people. And if you want to understand the ethos of Bitcoiners, especially OG people like me, we get that. And that for me, for you to understand, that was really the biggest impetus for me moving to El Salvador, because Bukele was the first politician that I've seen in my life that actually returned monetary freedom back to his people. And so, he did this before he actually cleaned up all the bad hombres. It was the first thing that he did in his country.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was a baller move. And I said, I got to go down and check this cat out. And I came down here with 6 of my VIPs, rented a place right on the Pacific Ocean, and I examined for myself really what was going on. And while I was here, don't you think he made the Bitcoin law when the time that I was physically here? And that's when I was like, wow, this is really going to happen. And this was the first community in the world down in El Zonte, which is called Bitcoin Beach, where they have a closed economy where they all use, Bitcoin. And to see that the first time, to see like Satoshi Nakamoto's dream of peer-to-peer money transfer happening, and to see these people doing it first with their government's blessing, I'm just going to tell you, it was, for a freedom maximalist, it was a powerful issue. And my son was actually with me at the time. And my son turned around to me, he says, Dad, we need to move here. And that was kind of a shock, because I was already thinking it. And when he told me that, my nurse was also here, and my nurse looked at me and she goes, she was scared to go to El Salvador, this 4 years ago. And then when she got here, she goes, I feel safer here than I do in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, yeah, well, the State Department of the United States has done a really bad job of trying to scare people away from El Salvador. And I think the reason why is because when the changes started to happen with Bukele, I don't think anybody in the United States really wanted to put a spotlight on a politician doing the right thing.
Mm.
And when he passed the Bitcoin law, let's just put it this way, he went from a president of obscurity to a president of largesse. In fact, most Bitcoiners consider him, the GOAT of all presidents, meaning the greatest of all time, because of the things he's done. And now he's in his 5th year, or I should say 6th year of presidency. If you saw what he's doing for the infrastructure here, like the money that he's made from Bitcoin, he's actually fixing the country up. Like he's doing things that other politicians tell you they're going to do, but don't do. Mm. And, right now we have one of the major roads called Jerusalem Avenue. He put plants up, and he said, well, it makes sense. He goes, I've talked to Dr. Kruse. All the diesel cars we have make a lot of CO2. And he says we need to plant more trees and put more plants by the roadways. So what did he do? He lined the whole avenue with plants. If I try to do that with the politician in the United States, they'd laugh me out of the room, because they all believe the bullshit from the WEF and climate change and all that, which is basically another way to steal people's money.
Absolutely.
So those are the reasons why, Adrian, I felt compelled to jump without wings. And, I'm going to show you this. You see the statue up there?
Yeah.
That statue up there is here for that reason. When my members come, I tell them that statue is you jump without wings. You get your wings on the way down. And a lot of the people that come here, some of them don't relocate, but they'll relocate to Panama, they'll relocate to Nicaragua. They're coming to this part of the world. Why? Because in America, everybody sees Bukele the same way. They're like, they can't believe that this guy in the most dangerous country in the world and literally changed it in 6 years. And he's given, decentralized money back to people. And now you can see he's cultivating a big relationship with Trump. He's taken some of the prisoners into our prison system here, because we have a zero tolerance policy for crime. That's the reason why this place is so safe. But the other thing, this is the first time, I think, in United States history and El Salvador history, where the United States CIA and FBI are not pointing the gun at El Salvador or, Central America. The gun of the United States now is pointed at the American taxpayer. And that's actually the source of the beef between Elon Musk and Trump. And I think Elon Musk thought that Trump would not cave uh, as fast as he did, but I don't think Elon really understands that being president of the United States is kind of a figurehead because you really don't have that much power. Congress holds the purse strings, and whatever they decide, they're going to do. And since we all know that they're stealing, we found that out from USAID. Um, Really, what it's going to come to, Adrian, I'm going to be honest with you. This is the second part of why I moved here. I think Americans have to pull out the Constitution and carefully read what was written between Amendment 1 and Amendment 3 and really start to be serious about what happened in 1774.
Yeah.
Because the situation in the United States is a little bit worse than it was in 1774. And I can tell you, at least 50% of the country is fed up. And what's going on in Los Angeles right now is a marker of that. Now, I will tell you, that is also a psyops. The CIA and FBI are behind this, trying to set it up. But Americans are fed up with illegal immigration. And it turns out that the belief is there's more illegal aliens in Los Angeles than any city in the United States. The estimate that some people have put out there is 1 in 3, 1 in 4.
Oh, shit.
It's kind of incredible. And the reason why this resonates, with this discussion, you may not know this, but El Salvador has about 10 million people. 5 to 6 million live in El Salvador. The other 3 or 4 million live in the United States, specifically Los Angeles, New York, all the Democrat-controlled cities.
Yeah, wow.
So a lot of these Salvadoreños now are coming back and seeing Salvador and going, why do I want to live in LA with this shit show going on when it's here? And, it's created this interesting situation, so to speak. But I think that the situation in the States is going to get worse than better, especially if they don't get Bitcoin in soon, because if the money fails, then I'm going to tell you, the United States becomes a total shit show. But to be quite frank with you, everybody does. That includes your country, Europe, because we're the global reserve currency. And if the global reserve currency blows up, you are going to have civilization level unrest.
Yeah, look, and I think that's, to me, it seems like it's inevitable that it'll get to that way. I honestly think I'm hoping in Australia that we'll get much more of a backbone. I mean, to sort of, I guess, digress into where a couple of the points that you were talking about earlier. Look, Australia did have our guns taken away, in the 90s. John Howard took that away. But I think what a lot of people don't realize is that over the last 30 years, Australians have more guns than we ever did in the 90s. So I do think that there is a movement towards us Aussies wanting to fight back. And we have a similar sentiment with our countrymen and our, through the COVID period and all that kind of stuff. Our leadership, our government, Jack, is weak as piss. They are fucking cooked in terms of they're signing the pandemic treaty agreements with the WEF. They're entering into the World Health Organization with all of their bullshit that comes with the vaccines and stuff like that. They're recommending the jabs to children still and to pregnant women and all those sorts of things. They're like, we've got a digital ID bill that's been passed. I mean, they're fucking spending trillions of dollars on everything. So our country is like way cooked. And there are people that have the same sentiment as you and I in terms of being sovereign and being free. I don't know if they're necessarily Bitcoin savvy at all, but I guess.
Well, you need to be, if you're serious about being free, remember the first thing that's important. I'll just point this out for the people in the audience who don't understand that. When the war in Ukraine between Russia broke out, the first thing that caused a dislocation in Ukraine is all the banks closed. The people that had Bitcoin had no problem. Point two, the communist country that's closest to me right now, which is Venezuela. Venezuela's money went boom after they nationalized. What are the savages they're doing that are locked in the country? They're using Bitcoin to transact. So the point that I would make to you is if you're really a freedom maximalist and you're in Australia, the first order, and this will shock you when I say it, I think you need to have a Bitcoin wallet and understand Bitcoin before you need to own a gun. And once you do that, then you need to start building up your arsenal. And then I think you have to make a decision, like you said, because I do respect your decision. Do you want to stay and fight, or do you want to go away? And the point, because I've taken this criticism on many podcasts already, I pointed out to people, though, that the United States was formed by Brits that moved to the United States. Remember, that's an immigration situation as well. And what happened? It doesn't mean you can't fight back from another country. And if you know anything about me, I've been on national TV in the United States 3 times in the last 2 weeks about the same issues you and I are talking about. And I have to be honest with you, when I go on TV in the United States, you want to talk about a hellraiser and the things that I say, like I'm not even being provocative with you because I know that you're an Aussie and you're in another country. And I don't expect you to understand, the angle that I'm coming from. But do I lead my tribe, the Bitcoiners, the decentralized medicine people? I'm trying to link those two things together. In fact, I'm headed to a former communist country as a keynote speaker in the next couple of days. So to talk about these very issues, to talk about, what's going on in medicine, what's going on with the vaccines. There's a lot of people over there that will be coming to this conference from continental Europe, also from Australia, because there's no real big conferences where you guys are. The biggest one is in the United States. They do have one in Asia, but this one is in Central Europe, former Yugoslavia, Czech Republic, Prague. And when I went there last year, I was really stunned. I met a lot of people from Australia. I met a lot of people from New Zealand. I met a lot of people from Asia. And the one thing that stunned me the most, the Europeans that were there, many of them were from former communist bloc countries. And they said, look, we lived through this communist thing in the 40s, 50s, and 60s and 70s, and we understand what centralization got us. We're not going there. And the dislocation was really interesting because the people that were there from Australia and UK, they actually heard a story that they don't hear in their own countries from them. And, there was the majority of the people that were at this conference were from the Czech Republic and from like Estonia, Latvia, all the Eastern Bloc countries. And this is right when the war is going on. And they said, no, we don't want any part of centralization. We don't want any part of government interference. And I was stunned to find out in Prague how powerful, but it's a very quiet movement, but they've got a lot of people. And that's why I tried to tell you earlier that there's a lot more of us than you think. And the thing is,
Jack.
Bitcoiners,
I think
really talk
we're
about
singing
this
from the
stuff.
same hymn book. There's a lot of synergies between you and I, and between the people that watch this podcast and most of the podcasts that you've been on. I would say, I guess, to circle back to my original statement, like if you look at the States at the moment, right, how do you feel about the Maha movement and this fucking vaccine for cancer? That is a mRNA vaccine. Like, what do you think about Palantir and about this, these digital overlords that are, trying to monitor everyone's movements? I mean, that is a complete backflip of what Trump was saying, and even RFK, right through their campaigning, they were campaigning against government intervention, and now we're sort of faced with more intervention.
Well, that's why I'm trying to tell you that since 1963, when they killed JFK, we've been under a military coup.
Are you over 40, successful, but unfulfilled? Do you feel stuck, like you're not truly living up to who you really are? So many high achievers wake up and think, I'm a good person, I read all the books, I listen to all the podcasts, yet there's something missing. Well, you're not alone. I've been there myself quite a few times. And quite frankly, it took a lot of years of really fucking around, trying to figure out what I now call your higher self blueprint, which has enabled me to live a life and make a living with my passions and my purpose. If you're ready to break free from a life that's holding you back, I'm hosting a free training around the 5 pillars of success that will enable you to create a more meaningful, fulfilling, and purposeful life. So click the link in the show notes, and I look forward to seeing you in the training. But for now, let's get back to the podcast.
But it's also the same story that I just told you with the Bitcoiners. Who's making the decisions really here? It's depending on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That's who runs the United States. And who are they in cahoots with? This is where you start to understand the Bitcoin story. With the bankers, that's the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. So anytime you hear Jamie Dimon go on CNBC, remember, he's a front man for the bankers. He hates Bitcoin. But what are they going to do now? They're going to custody Bitcoin. What are we telling people? If you're a fucking idiot and made the right choice to buy Bitcoin and let Jamie Dimon custody it, good fucking luck. That doesn't make any sense at all. So the issue with the United States, so you understand my perspective, because this is what I went on TV for, is we now have a war between two enemies. It's the technocrats going after the bankers. And Trump has brought the technocrats to Washington, D.C. That's the J.D. Vance. Remember, J.D. Vance is basically a senator who is propped up by Peter Thiel. Mm-hmm. And the reason Trump picked J.D. Vance should be blatantly obvious to you. They tried to kill him in Butler, Pennsylvania, the bankers. The bankers didn't want anything about Trump because what did they want? They wanted what Australia and the UK are pushing for in Canada now, which is a CBDC. So what did Trump do? A baller move. He put a guy worse than him as his vice president. So if you kill him, you're going to deal with a real problem. Because J.D. Vance, I will tell you this about him, don't trust him fucking at all, but he is wicked smart. I mean, wicked smart. And he is Peter Thiel's, how shall I say, politician in pocket. And you need to understand how Peter Thiel came into the United States, because a lot of people don't understand this outside the country. I just did a podcast with a guy from the Commonwealth. He's Scottish, but he lives in the UK. He had his medical license taken away in the UK over this whole COVID thing. Mm-hmm. And I explained to him, John Poindexter, who used to be our defense secretary under Bush, is the one that brought Peter Thiel in, from the PayPal mafia. And remember, the PayPal mafia, most of the people know that's Elon Musk, it's Peter Thiel, it's LinkedIn. Yeah. Those are big players, but you also have, the Facebook guys there. You also have the Winklevoss twins. You have some other people like Alex Karp. And what is the goal? Peter Thiel sold John Poindexter on the idea that we know that the bankers control the world. Ever since the Napoleonic Wars, the Rothschilds moniker has been, if you control the money, you control the government. It doesn't matter what government's in, we'll control it. And that's been pretty true since 1812 with the Bank of England and the City of London. So what happens in the late 19th century, early 20th century, the Rothschilds made some big mistakes. Some of their friends put a hit out on the Romanovs, okay? And the Romanovs are Christian. And when they go down, it created a huge problem for the royal family. This allowed the window of the American version of the Zionists, which are the Rockefellers, to come in and basically beat the Rothschilds at their own game. And what happened? All the corporations that were helping the Commonwealth fight World War I. It was so powerful that the Rockefellers and Rothschilds joined forces. People who were with the Chatham House and the Council of Foreign Relations sat on the committee to write the Treaty of Versailles. Who are those people? Keynes, and from Keynesian economics, but who are the Fabians from the United States who are loyal to the crown? That was Allen Dulles and his brother John Foster Dulles. Many people in the United States don't even know that these guys who become much famous when they kill JFK they started their political careers at the Treaty of Versailles. And they were really, really important in setting the stage to try to get a loyal title back for the Rothschilds. And what was the goal? The goal was to recapture the United States and Russia, who are former colonies, so they can bring them back. Because what's the goal of a banker? And I think you know this. When you have a colony back, it's like having a mall with all of your people there that you can just harvest, their bank accounts and do whatever you want with fees. It's a very profitable business, and they were very good at it. And the Rockefellers basically followed the playbook of what the Rothschilds had done from the Napoleonic Wars until about the 1870s. And that's when John D. Rockefeller basically ran a monopoly on kerosene, and then he later morphed into oil. And then when an unfortunate thing for him happened, a Serbian refugee shoot the president that they got elected, J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, and Andrew Carnegie, who's the steel magnate in the United States. They pooled their money together in the late 1890s to get William McKinley elected. So they were so powerful at this time. They had so much money that they actually bought an election. And a Serbian refugee shoots McKinley. And this is why I'm telling you the story, because it's very important for you to understand Trump and J.D. Vance. Back in the days at the turn of the century, 1900, your political opponent, when they lost, you would often make them the vice president. Why? Because the vice president doesn't do anything. And it's almost kind of like a job where you put them in amber, just like what's happened to Bobby. But here's the problem. His political rival was Teddy Roosevelt. And Teddy Roosevelt fucking hated the Rockefellers. So what's the first thing he does? He breaks up the trust, the Standard Oil Trust. And that's how we get Big Pharma. So this doesn't stop Rockefeller. What does he do? He basically takes all the waste chemicals and figures out how he's going to make Big Pharma. To this very day, he does all of the companies that were in New Jersey. That's why Big Pharma is based in Boston and New Jersey in the United States still today.
Yeah,
What's the propaganda he does next? He hires a guy named Abraham Flexer to create the Flexer Report. He gets rid of all the vitalists, all the people that talk about energy, all the people talking about the sun. And I don't know how much science you really know, but at the turn of the century, there's a guy from Scandinavia named Niels Rydberg, who wins the Nobel Prize in 1900 for using, UV light and sunlight to treat pemphigus vulgaris and many diseases, that I recommend now. Most people don't even know that Nobel Prize was done because of the propaganda machine of the Rockefellers. They had everybody believing that you needed a drug or a pill for every ill, because who was running the pill mill? The Rockefellers. So the Rockefellers got a monopoly in oil, banking, and drugs in the United States, and ran the whole show. They were actually more wealthy than even the Rothschild family at one time. The Rothschilds had a different program where they broke their money up about $500 trillion amongst their whole family. And they do have a large family because remember, they've been playing this game longer than the Rockefellers did. And where it all comes to pass, where did the two banking elites come together? It's right after World War I. The Fabians, who were built in 1887 in the UK, those are the people that eventually formed the Labour Party. That's who Starmer, this whole story ties directly to him. And David Rockefeller is the offshoot of the Chatham House. He starts the Council of Foreign Relations. Casey and Callie Means, their dad worked for David Rockefeller. Okay. So on Callie's LinkedIn profile, he had a CFR designation, which is why I called his bullshit out on the Danny Jones podcast. I wanted everybody in the United States to know that this guy is a Fabian. And if you know what Fabians do, their stained glass window sits in the London School of Economics, where you see a wolf with a sheep's clothing over it. Like they're not even hiding it. And what's their mission statement? It'll sound eerily similar to something that Aussies have heard now. They basically slowly over time want to get to a one world government. Well, what does that morph into from 1873 to 1971 when we go off the gold standard? Prince Charles then and his friend Henry Kissinger, who's the Secretary of State of Nixon, get together with this guy named Klaus Schwab, and they form the World Economic Forum. So what are you seeing here? You're basically seeing the evolution of the Fabian idea. Why did the Fabian idea manifest in UK? Because they lost the United States in 1774. So Queen Victoria is the one, because she was the ruler at this time, she took people from Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, which is where she's from. She's a Germanic British Empire. And most of the people that were from Saxe-Coburg-Gotha turned out to be the Zionists, the British Zionists, and the British imperialists that come up with the Balfour Declaration. And remember, the Balfour Declaration is how the Brits got what would become Israel from the Ottoman Empire in the Treaty of Versailles. And guess who engineered all this? Keynes, Allen, and John Foster Douglas. So when you see the history in front of you, and then now you take it through the 20th century, and you really begin to understand that the history of the 20th century from a British perspective is they need to draw the United States into two wars to try to get this one world government idea back. Where do they find some help? The big help for the American government is not from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They actually hate Churchill and think he's a pussy. But that would be Eisenhower, MacArthur, and Patton. But General Groves, who ran the Manhattan Project, turned out to be the one that set up the industrial military complex. He was forced out of the United States government in 1947 by Eisenhower. Truman is the president then. And what you may not know, because I know a lot of Aussies don't know American history well, General Groves is the reason why we got Harry Truman. You probably remember that FDR was a 4-term president in the United States. In his last term, when he was running in 44, they went to the DNC convention. His vice president was a guy named Henry Wallace. How can I explain Henry Wallace to you right now? Henry Wallace was like Bernie Sanders is today, a raving fucking communist, okay? He gave a speech in 1942 that made General Groves' hair fall out. He basically said, after the war's over, that I see the future of America is going to be for the common man. So you can imagine this guy that's building an atomic bomb with a bunch of Jewish scientists that Alan Dulles goes and gets from Europe. He actually gets a list from Einstein, and that's how Operation Paperclip starts. It starts before the war.
Oh, wow.
Dulles goes and harvests the science they need. They come back to the Empire State Building on the 67th floor. That's why it's called the Manhattan Project. Now, how does this whole shit story break? Well, General Groves finds out that there's Nazi U-boats pulling into New York Harbor, and they're spies. They're trying to find out why the United States is getting all these Jewish scientists, because they don't know. What you may not know, and I don't know how much you guys know in Australia about the transfer agreement. Hitler is the biggest psyop in the 20th century. Everybody thinks, he was a fascist. You don't know. You know who set him up? It was the royal family and the Rothschilds. So there's this agreement that's made in 1931 between the royal family, the Rothschilds, and Pope Leo the 11th and Pope Leo the 12th. And this whole thing almost gets blown up because King George, who is the leader after Victoria dies, he dies, and his son ascends is Edward VIII. Edward VIII knows all about this plan, about the transfer agreement. What that agreement was, we're going to take all the Jews, the Continental Jews, we're going to move them to Palestine because nobody wanted to live in Palestine. It was a desert. Nobody gave a shit about it, okay? But the Rothschilds wanted to fulfill what was in, their religious texts, and they thought this would be another feather in their cap. So the goal was to prop Hitler up, put all the Jews' money in the Rothschild Bank, and when they got to Israel, or what was then still Palestine, they would get their money back. So Hitler's final solution was not to kill people. It was to do the dirty work of the Rothschilds and the royal family to take all the Jews out of Europe and put them in Palestine. So just so you know that you can fact check Uncle Jack on this, if you go to London, there is a stamped coin in their libraries that, or I should say the museums. You have to ask to see it. It's got a swastika on one side, and it's got the stamp of the royal family on the others. And this transfer agreement is enacted in 31. But who's the dumbass that almost lets this whole thing out? It's Edward VIII. He is prowling around with Hitler from 31 all the way to 37. There's pictures of him doing the Heil Hitler thing. He's the one that taught his niece, who would be Queen Elizabeth. And there's pictures that you can actually find now of her doing the Heil Hitler stuff
Really?
at this time. So the story that everybody's told in the world is he abdicates in 37 because he married an American that was divorced, Wallace Simpson. Total bullshit. The reason why his father made him abdicate, I should say his family made him abdicate, is because they were afraid that the transfer agreement was going to get out, and then the Americans would not be lured into the war. Because if you remember what's going on at this time, we have the 36 Olympics in Berlin. We have all that shit going on. And Chamberlain goes and does this bullshit thing where he gives a tract of land that's really close to Yugoslavia and looks like he's kowtowing. This is all psyops. And then that's when he goes back to Parliament and tells Parliament everything's fine, and it's not. That was a pretext to get Chamberlain in. Why? Because Chamberlain was, he was the man of the Rothschilds. The Rothschilds had bought his debt because he was a drunk, and they basically made him their front man. He was their guy through the whole war. So what happens next is the transfer agreement plan falls to shit, because what does Hitler tell them? There's no way that I can move all these people and do this and fight a two-front war. It's impossible. And the solution that comes up is you start to hear that they're killing people. But this is the interesting thing. This is part of the psyops of the royal family and the Rothschilds. When you actually look at the hardcore math and you look at what we really know, there's nothing about the final solution in any stuff found in Germany after the war. There's nothing in the United States intelligence about this either. And here's the craziest part of the story. When you open up the Nazi tanks and their motorcycles, GM and Ford are stamped on the engines. In other words, American corporations who are tied to the Fabians are supporting the war. And everybody always wondered, how did Hitler get all this munitions and all these things? It was the Rothschilds were selling them the bullets.
Wow.
Okay. And he was facilitating that. Who was the guy that was doing the banking on behalf of the Rothschilds? This will really stun you. Prescott Bush, the grandfather of George W. Bush. He is working for Brown Harriman on Wall Street. And all the things I'm telling you, to this day, you can find them when you do a cursory search. He hid millions of dollars in Rothschild and Hitler money that was being used for after the war. And believe it or not, the Bush family almost went down over this, in the 1990s, because people started to find out about it. And if you remember the election that we had between Gore and Bush, it was a huge problem. So what do you need to know about why I'm going down this random walk of history for you? So now that you know it's a psyop, Stalin already knew it was a psyop. He knew the deal. When he goes to have the three famous meetings, when you get Chamberlain, FDR, and the American, I should say, Stalin there, the first one happens in Tehran. In Tehran, Stalin tells FDR for the first time, just so you know, the guys that are on our side aren't who you think they are. They're the ones that propped up Hitler. And FDR looks at him like, you got to be kidding me. So he goes back and tells General Groves this. Remember I told you the story, Groves needs to find who these Nazi people are coming over in New York. Since the United States is now fighting a two front war in 42, he has no way to put any military men on the Brooklyn Navy Yard. So what does he do? He comes up with what turns out to be a brilliant idea. He goes to the mob. The mob controls the Brooklyn Navy Yards. So he brings in Meyer Lansky, who, is a Ukrainian Jew that emigrated in the United States. Who did he work for initially through Prohibition? The Bronfmans, who are Zionists from Canada, who to this day have a huge liquor empire. And they also have many people that are loyal to Britain. Why? Because it's part of the Commonwealth. So Meyer Lansky tells General Groves and FDR, I'm willing to help you. But one caveat, my buddy who runs the murder side of my equation, because Meyer Lansky was the accountant. Look, Lucky Luciano, he goes, he's in a maximum security prison. You got to move him. So guess what happens? They move Lucky Luciano. Again, another thing that a savage in Australia can fact check me on. And he basically is able to run Murder Inc. throughout the war. Meyer Lansky finds 19 Nazi spies. He kills all of them except one. The guy he doesn't kill is an SS surgeon named Kurt Plotner. And Kurt Plotner is the one that tells Groves and FDR that there's no Holocaust going on. But what the Nazis are doing is they are using drugs. They've used fluoride. They've done different experiments on people. But the big one was mescaline peyote to see if they can control people. What the Nazis were trying to do is control Jews to get them on the trains, to get them to Palestine, and nothing was working.
Yeah,
okay?
wow.
So when he hears this, Meyer Lansky goes, wait a minute, what do you mean that the Germans are shipping Jews and trying to get them to Palestine? He goes, yeah, but we're not trying to kill them. He goes, the deal was we're trying to get them to Palestine, and the Rothschilds are going to hold their money until they get there, repatriate it, and give it to them.
Are you over 40, successful, but unfulfilled? Do you feel stuck, like you're not truly living up to who you really are? So many high achievers wake up and think, I'm a good person, I read all the books, I listen to all the podcasts, yet there's something missing. Well, you're not alone. I've been there myself quite a few times. And quite frankly, it took a lot of years of really fucking around, trying to figure out what I now call your higher self blueprint, which has enabled me to live a life and make a living with my passions and my purpose. If you're ready to break free from a life that's holding you back, I'm hosting a free training around the 5 pillars of success that will enable you to create a more meaningful, fulfilling, and purposeful life. So click the link in the show notes, and I look forward to seeing you in the training. But for now, let's get back to the podcast.
When Lansky hears this, he's fucking furious because he realizes what's happening. The Rothschilds are using the Jewish people as human shields. And this is the first time the Americans get the idea that Zionists and Jewish people are not the same. Basically, what Zionism is, if you want to really understand it, it is British imperialism dressed up as a Jew. And that's what Zionism is. And what happens after that, Meyer Lansky gets so pissed off, okay, with the Rothschilds, he's going to see to it that he's going to fix their ass. So wait till you see how he fixes this problem. So when he comes into the military and he gives General Groves and FDR these 19 prisoners, you can imagine that the American government in the middle of a war is very happy about how productive this unusual alliance is between the mob and the government. Lansky becomes really good friends with people very high up on the military, and he's a patriot through the whole war. But what else is Lansky doing? Remember, I told you he's Jewish. He's sharing this information with the people of the Zionist Federation because he doesn't understand the link between all these people and how they're tied together. These will be the people that eventually form the government of Israel in 48. So what happens? War's over. You know that. The American generals that I told you are who absolutely hated General Groves. The reason they hated him, they thought Groves was going to try to take credit for winning the war with the 2 bombs. The war was already over. We didn't need the bombs, but Groves had spent so much money in 3 years. This was the largest engineering project the United States has ever done and did it well in 3 years. And Groves was a little bit of an egomaniac. So what effectively happens? Eisenhower gets him thrown out of the military. On his way out, the story I told you with Henry Wallace and didn't finish, Groves talks to the most influential politician in the United States. To this day, we've never had a politician run in the House of Representatives, be a state senator, and be Secretary of State. He's the only guy that's ever done it. His name's Jimmy Burns. Groves goes to Jimmy Burns, the most powerful guy, and says, we need to get rid of Henry Wallace and we need to install a Manchurian candidate. So what do? They pick senator from Missouri, which Missouri is a know-nothing state at this time in the United States, and they install him as the vice president. Literally in 9 minutes in the DNC in December, they stop all the voting. Henry Wallace is way ahead. Jimmy Burns goes and starts selling postmaster general things, like bribing everybody. They come back the next day, the next morning, and the votes completely flip.
Wow.
And they put Truman is now the vice president. Why does Groves want to do this? Because this should show you how smart the military men are. I mean, you got to remember, he built a bomb in 3 years, so you know he's not a dumbass. But he knows that FDR is going to die from his Guillain-Barré or polio, whichever story you really want to believe. And it turns out he's right. So at the second big meeting of the big 3, Stalin, FDR, and Churchill, what does FDR tell Stalin after the Tehran meeting? So this is now 1943. He says, we're going to rebuild Russia and Europe. That's what he tells him. Churchill hears this. Okay? Churchill's not very happy about it. But the Secretary of State, I think his name is Henry Stimson, he comes back and casually tells General Groves this, and Groves isn't happy at all. At all. Why? Because Groves knows that war is a good business, because remember, he's the one doing it. He's got all this money coming in. He needs to have an enemy on the other side. And who does he see as the enemy? Russia. Okay? So the next thing that happens is big. The third meeting is right after FDR dies. He dies in April of 45. Groves tells Truman and makes Jimmy Burns go with him to make sure he doesn't fuck this up. They meet at Potsdam. And what's the message that Groves tells Truman to tell Stalin? We're not fucking rebuilding Russia, and we may not even let you in the United Nations. Because what is the United Nations? It is an idea of the Council of Foreign Relations to keep the peace. So what effectively is the UN? It's another Fabian play. And that's where this idea comes from. It started off as the Council of Foreign Relations and went to the League of Nations, which was Woodrow Wilson during the Treaty of Versailles. Now the idea gets morphed into the UN. So when Stalin hears this, he realizes he's been completely fucked, okay? So everything in Europe changes because the war is over. Now you have the Russians running into Europe to meet Eisenhower, and they are trying, everybody is trying to get into Germany to find the truth out, okay? Because the Russians know the only way to save face is they got to get proof to Truman that they've been fucking scammed by people on their own side. And General Groves wants none of it, okay? Eisenhower knows something fucked up is going on. And this is in 47. So he has so much political power, and you should know that because who's the next president? Eisenhower. He uses his political power in the military to get rid of General Groves. But what does General Groves do? He doesn't play checkers. He's a really smart guy. He gets Harry Truman to sign the National Security Act. You know what the National Security Act has in it? Formation of the CIA. All the people that were loyal to General Groves, guess where they worked? In the CIA.
Yeah, wow.
So who's the first guy? The first guy that goes in is a guy named George Kennan. And he is best friends with guess who? Alan Dulles. Okay. So Alan Dulles plays a role again here. And then who's the young guy that they're grooming to take over? I'm blanking on his name. I'll think about it. It plays a big role because, believe it or not, that's when I get involved a little bit in this story. These guys basically, when they throw Groves out, Groves immediately goes back to Meyer Lansky and says, look, I need to somehow get some money. Groves knows that Remington Rand, this is a company in the United States, they were the #1 military supplier of all our weapons. He becomes CEO of that company. He brings Meyer Lansky in to get it all cleaned up. The next move he makes, he buys another company that nobody can figure out what the hell he's doing. And that company's called Burroughs. They make toasters, calculators, small little electronics.
Mm-hmm.
What does Groves do? Remember I told you, he's an engineer from MIT. He makes the first company in Silicon Valley that makes computers. The name changes to Sperry, okay? He turns out in the 2 terms that Eisenhower is working to build the first UNIVAC computers in the world. He does this very quietly while IBM is doing what they're doing. But what's the thing that changes the game? What changes everything for Australia, for the UK, for us? The Russians in 1957 used all their technology not to really build bombs. They got to space before the United States. They put Sputnik out. And this stunned the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and it really stunned Eisenhower. He couldn't believe it. And remember I told you about the proxy, that Groves wanted to always make Russia the enemy. Well, guess what? This is when Eisenhower had to go back to Groves because guess who sold them the 61 UNIVAC computers? Groves did. And Eisenhower then realized he had to bring back in the fucking guy he threw out of the military. So remember, the reason I call it the industrial military complex is because Groves thrown out of the military, forms the industry. Meyer Lansky sets up all the banking for him. Who's one of his main benefactors? A guy you've heard of, Howard Hughes. Mm-hmm. That's why you hear all of the companies that are associated with them, they're outside the United States, and then the defense contractors come back in. What's the name of that act at the end of Eisenhower's term? It's called ARPA. What's the most famous thing you know about them? They make the internet, don't they? Okay. What's the name is changed in 1958 to what? DARPA. Exactly. So now you can understand how this goes. So the link between the CIA and the industrial military complex is like this because it grows. So you can only imagine what happens. Now you have the bankers on this side, the technocrats on this side, and that trend goes all the way up to where we are now. Mm-hmm. Here's the craziest part of the story. Thiel, as a line of the evolutionary chain of the Groves people, realizes that if you have a surveillance economy, which is what the Bush people did through 9/11 with the Israelis by knocking down the tower and getting the Patriot Act passed, Thiel tells Poindexter, if we set up a surveillance economy, it doesn't matter about the bankers at all because we'll have total control. And right now, what's going on in the United States in Trump's presidency right now is the battle between 2 evil powers. So one owns Bitcoin, and I haven't got into how we got Bitcoin, but it's actually a Meyer Lansky story as well. Mm-hmm. But from Meyer Lansky trying to do it, it gets out open sourced, and that's the reason why Bitcoin is not a CIA play. It actually got out when it wasn't supposed to get out. So this is great news for like me and you, because it's one thing that gives you a Lloydial title to your own freedom. But the problem is what the technocrats believe, like people like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, we can give people Bitcoin because if we control the on and off ramps, we effectively still control them. But their mortal enemy are the Wall Street bankers. Their mortal enemy is the U.S. Treasury market. Their mortal enemy is the fiat side of this system. And that is why you see this going on the world stage. Because I think if you don't understand this history, Adrian, I don't think that you'll really understand truly what's going on in politics. And when you hear this story, you go, okay, now this makes a little bit of sense, because now I understand why, like, Congress is totally with the bankers. They're getting money hand in fist. And remember, Rothschilds and Rockefellers, they set up the slush fund in the Ukraine to make sure they could pay off all these people. That's why this is all going on. And who's helping? Starmer with labor, Richie Sunak, Liz Truss. They're all on the same fucking side. It's like a wingnut. It doesn't matter if you're right or left. You're still playing the Fabian game. And, you know, I can tell you this because you're part of the Commonwealth. You understand it. Ever since the Magna Carta to now, the royal family plays a fucking 1,000-year game. They don't give a shit about 20 years. They plan for hundreds of years in advance. And that's actually what's going on now. And the problem is the United States is not set up for that 100-year plan. But who does want to set a 100-year plan up? Peter Thiel. And Thiel wants to do it through technology because he believes his mode and method of control is actually better than what the Rothschilds and Rockefellers brought to the table, because they controlled banking, media, the Circus Maximus in Hollywood, you know, the pedophile rings. I mean, you don't even know this, but what is Epstein and what is Diddy? Guess who they got the idea from? Meyer Lansky. He was the first one who did it. Well, who was Meyer Lansky's biggest net? J. Edgar Hoover from the FBI. But the difference between Epstein and Diddy is Meyer Lansky didn't want to out anybody. What his goal was, he didn't want to blackmail you. He wanted to control your behavior. So what Meyer Lansky effectively did, he controlled the FBI so that they couldn't fuck with his partners, namely the Italian mob. And when you begin to understand this, you start to see really why JFK is taken out. Why the mob, the CIA, and the folks in Israel all had a fucking reason to take this guy out. So when I go on the podcast in December 2nd, 2024, and tell an American, Danny Jones, whose podcast is popular, but he's got all of his sponsors that are tied to Zionists and Jewish people in Florida, he's like, no, I don't want to talk about it. And I told him, I said, mark my words, Trump also made us a promise that if he got elected, because who was his best friend when he was a young man? JFK Jr., meaning JFK's son. And he told JFK before he died and effectively was killed probably by Hillary Clinton in a plane crash in 91. If you don't know that story, he was running for senator. When he died, she got to be senator in New York.
Wow.
But what happens there is Trump gets in the first 100 days. Remember, I told you, I got Ross, I got Bitcoin, and then he released the JFK files. And what did we find out definitively? That what I told Danny Jones was true. CIA and the Israel folks were involved in the JFK hit. So now we know it's no longer fucking conspiracy theory. So now you need to understand, if you're an American, truly what's going on in Washington, D.C., because it's a fucking cabal of criminals on both sides. Like King George in 1774 is like a street fight compared to these guys. So that's the reason why I've been very popular. It explains why Bobby Kennedy and Maha keep making all these vaccines, because they have to taper the Ponzi scheme and kill people, because it's easier to control a smaller number of people. Both sides believe that, the bankers and the technocrats. So that's the reason why the vaccines ain't going away. And then when you really see the stuff that the next level of COVID, now it's going to be self-amplifying messenger RNA in food. What does that mean? You'll see atoms in the things you eat, but it'll self-assembly in you and you'll get the disease later down the road. So this is truly like a nuclear bomb. I call it a silent weapon for a silent war. That's how slick the science in DARPA is. And how do I know that? I know a lot of DARPA scientists. In fact, I talked to DARPA in my career because of all the physics that I know. And when I tell you that this is probably the most evil thing you can do, I mean, this is the point I would make to you. in the United States, we started with the Roe versus Wade, where we kill babies before they're born. Vaccines kill babies after they're born. And then the industrial military complex kills your children when they're, teenagers and adults. So what is the whole goal? To kill. That is the system that the United States has set up with the Fabians in charge. And who did it all start with? It started with the Treaty of Versailles and the Dulles brothers. The Dulles brothers were the key to killing Kennedy. But all of the people that were friends with him, Richard Nixon was involved in this. LBJ was involved in this. Like, when you understand now that the entire American government, from General Groves to today, has been an industrial military coup, it effectively got all its power when they knocked off JFK. Every president since that, with the exception of Trump, has been their pick. That's why they hate Trump so much. That's why they try to take him out. That's why they did January 6th, which is basically they installed Joe Biden in a fraudulent election. That election was completely stolen. And everybody knows it, but the problem is the way our system works, that it's really difficult to prove. And what did the industrial military complex, where did they get this idea? You're going to laugh when I tell you this. In General Groves, some of his archives that I read, he said the best quote that Stalin ever had was about elections. It doesn't matter about the elections. It matters who counts the votes. And don't think that shows up in America. Not only does it show up in JFK's election, it shows up in Bush's election with Gore, and it shows up in Biden and Trump in 2016. So that gets you up to speed, kind of where I am. And you can imagine, because I told you this and everybody in America knows that I know this stuff inside and out, I'm really popular to go on TV and tell people, point out who these people are. I'm even pointing out people on Twitter now who are the DARPA scientists that are getting doctors in the United States. We have a gastroenterologist in the United States named Sabine Hazen. I don't know if you know her. She just had 4 papers retracted. And I'll tell you why it's important, because it's a Commonwealth link. You remember the guy, Andy Wakefield, who used to be UK gastroenterologist that got disgraced?
Yeah, I interviewed Andy a couple of weeks ago.
Well, he's the guy that made the first link between autism and changes in the gut.
Yeah.
Well, Sabine Hazen practices in California. She's kind of taken up his work, but not really. She fell into it by mistake. She started to find out, because she's a microbiome expert. She now has a definitive proof that Wakefield was right. She put it out in papers. This guy named Chestnut, who is on Twitter, I'm not going to tell you his name, but he's a PhD. He's a DARPA guy. And then another lady who I am going to tell you her name, Elizabeth Bick, B-I-K. Those two are in cahoots in centralized science. They just got 4 of her papers retracted. So what are they doing? This is censorship in the literature. So remember, they canceled Andy, and you know how they did that. It's going to be really difficult to cancel somebody like Hazen these days. So what do? The next best thing. Well, who cares about her and her work if we can retract it? So guess who controls the peer review literature all in the world? This is going to really make you shit. Ghislaine Maxwell's family. That's what Robert Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein, that's their level.
Way. Yeah.
Swear to God, dude. I told Bobby Kennedy this the first time I met with him. I said, what's the difference between fiction and the truth? Fiction has to make sense. The truth doesn't. And if that doesn't fit the story that I'm telling you right now, because when you hear the totality of the story and you hear where all the octopus arms fit in, you start to go, Jesus, now everything starts to make sense. Why the world and why the things are happening, like in the UK, in Australia, in Canada. I mean, King Charles just left Canada to basically give Carney his marching orders. You know where Carney came from. He used to run the Bank of England. He fucking swindled a whole bunch of people over there. Well, now he's doing it over here. Why? Because King Charles needs a guy there. And I know they got guys down where you are. I mean, I remember the story from New South Wales when the lady got busted, getting paid off from Pfizer. And she's like the one that put everybody in lockdown, and nobody did anything with her. I was like, you got to be kidding me. You found out she's getting paid and she's the one that did all the lockdowns there.
Yeah.
And I know that South Wales was
blanking on
worse.
her name too. I can't fucking remember her name.
I just remember how stupid she looked when she got busted.
Yeah.
But to see all the people around her, and the thing is, I know for people in Australia, they may not understand how what's going on in that country links to the king and the royal family and the bankers. But now I'm giving you the story. Now you can understand, okay, there's an axis of evil on the banking side. There's an axis of evil on the technocrat side. The technocrat guys are all about Bitcoin because they know Meyer Lansky was the guy that was building it and lost control of it. So that's why they all own it, but they can't control it and they know it. But they're the guys that were all pushed in Silicon Valley where General Groves was. And Peter Thiel is just General Groves, except 2 generations forward.
Sure.
That's it.
So you do an amazing job of overlaying all of the stories, and then you see where all the dots marry up.
Well, I want savages across the world. Remember how we started the podcast when I said to you, Adrian, I'm telling you, once people become good historians, they're going to own Bitcoin. And the reason why is because Bitcoin is going to keep us being able to do what you and I are doing now, to educate people to the grift that's going on. Because what we need to really fix the world, it's kind of what Max Planck said. We need a lot of funerals of a lot of politicians. And we need to do that in many different countries. And I don't care if it's execution by election, but that means you have to believe that elections still matter. I don't think they really matter as much.
Agreed.
People do, but it turns out in El Salvador, it mattered a lot. Bukele getting elected here changed everything. And I will tell you, I think it mattered a lot in the United States this time, because if Biden and Kamala had gotten in, the United States would probably be Venezuela within 10 years.
Yeah, for sure.
And that would have been bad news for all of you as well. But then I think you would have seen, because I think ultimately what the monarchy wants is they want to take us back to the dark ages when it was feudalism and medievalism, where we're all the slaves on the plantation. You know, you're still going to be able to drink Starbucks and watch Netflix, you know, and you guys can watch your Australian rules football and rugby. We'll watch the NFL, but you're fucking a slave, whether you want to know it or not. And you're going to be tethered.
Income. Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of what they really want. And it's just another version of what humans have faced under centralized rule in the past. And the reason I give people in Australia, Canada, and the UK a lot of shit, you guys still have I would say the monarchy mindset. People in the United States, that's what separates us from you guys. We know we broke free of it 250 years ago. And there is a group of people in the United States that still are the fucking misfits. And I'm going to tell you, most of those people are the people that like Trump, and most of them own Bitcoin. That's what you need to know in Australia. And we don't give 2 fucks if our president is a little bit of a wackadoodle. We don't. As long as he's doing things that are good for the country, so that we don't become, you know, a fucking authoritarian regime. You know, we don't become what's going on in South Africa now. We don't become what's going on in Venezuela. You know, we don't become what just happened in Colombia and Ecuador, where, you know, presidential candidates are being fucking shot in the head on the street. That just doesn't, that's not a good thing. We lived through that already with McKinley and with JFK and also Abraham Lincoln. That's another thing I didn't tell you. Abraham Lincoln was also taken out by Queen Victoria's Fabians, in case you don't know that.
So in the solutions to a lot of these problems, that's where I really want to go with this. How do you navigate yourself around solving a lot of these world's problems with wherever you are residing in? I don't give a fuck whether you want to
fix the money, fix the world, dude. Bitcoin first.
Do you have any concerns that a digital currency like Bitcoin can be co-opted? Can the governments adopt it as a Bitcoin reserve and then infiltrate that system, much like they've done, you know, every other system all the time?
That's why I said people that say this stuff, Adrian, they don't understand Bitcoin. You have to remember,
I get it.
the guys who build Bitcoin, the idea starts with Lansky, goes to a guy named David Shum, then it goes to a guy named Len Sassaman. Just so you know who Len Sassaman is, he's the guy that built the dark web. He's the guy that built the TCP IP networks so that you can use the internet right now.
Mhm.
Okay, he kills himself. So that's who I think Satoshi Nakamoto is. He's the one that puts time stamping on Adam Back's proof of work. Everybody, in Bitcoin gives Adam Back a lot of credit. I don't. I don't think he did very much. But I do think that Sassaman and David Shum did the most. Why? Because David Shum came up with the idea of a peer-to-peer network first. But where did he get it from? He got it from Meyer Lansky, because Meyer Lansky told the bankers that he had them by the balls. That's why the Bank Secrecy Act comes out in 1970. Lansky tells the Rockefellers and Rothschilds, I know everything you're doing beforehand. And he goes, and we make money off that. And that's what fuels all the black ops for the industrial military complex in Israel. When the bankers heard that, they realized they weren't infallible. And do you know why Lansky did all that? Because the Rothschilds fucked the Jews, and Lansky's the one that found it out. So you have to realize this history is really powerful. And what I want people to know, fix the money, fix the world. Because what does that do? It gets rid of half the evil empire. The technocrats are going to try to control us with technology. We got to keep pushing that back. So that means we got to build citadels. And those citadels are backed by ammunition and uber wealth. And what do? If you're a savage, we bring you in. You're going to get milk. You're going to get your food. We're going to have farms. And we're going to be everywhere. Why? Because the American government was stupid not to kill Bitcoin when it was in the crib. And the reason why it's really difficult to kill, the way it's built, it's money you can't fuck with. So even if they shut the internet off, okay, there's parts, Bitcoiners have built parts of the network where it still works. If we get hit by a CME from the sun, it still will work. So realize that all the nerds in the beginning, these were the nerds that you really wanted on your team. They were smarter than the IRS. They were smarter than the CIA. And when Lansky told the IRS that he had access to their computers, to their databases through those Unix computers, they nearly shit, dude. And what did Lansky tell them in 1970 when they brought him in? They told them that you need to have programmable money. You know where the idea for the CBDC came from? Meyer Lansky told the BIS, that's what you need. But he warned them, it's going to be really difficult for you to build this because it's going to take a Herculean task. So when he tells them that, he knows that they're not going to be able to do it. What does Lansky do? He goes out and finds the smartest guys in Silicon Valley. He's like, these guys built a fucking bomb in 3 years. I think we can figure out another network that is fucking hardcore. And he does. And he's trying to keep that as the accountant for Murder Inc. in the industrial military complex. And eventually what becomes the technocrats. But after Lansky dies in 83, that's when it gets out. Sham lets it out to open source. And that's where all the cypherpunks come in. That's when Bitcoin becomes the property of the world. You want to know what that's like? That's like the American Declaration of Independence. Yeah. That's how you need to look at it. And what I want is, if you decide, Adrian, to stay in Australia, get a group of like-minded people, start buying Bitcoin and start buying citadels. Start getting people who can do trades, can farm, can make food, can hunt, can, make, rebuild cars. You need to be as crafty as the fucking people in Cuba. If you had an embargo for 50 or 60 years because that's what the other side's going to do to you, say, fuck you, I don't care. Get people into CAD/CAM, get engineers. Like, just so you know, Bitcoiners, where I am, we got all that. Really? We just need you to understand you need to get it. They can't stop us when we're fueled by something they can't stop. The technocrats can maybe make our life miserable to say travel and go in between, but logistically, no. I mean, you have to realize, Adrian, some of my friends, they own 10,000 Bitcoin. I mean, already they're billionaires, okay? And they're going to be really wealthy when they start putting fucking Bitcoin on US treasuries to give 50 to 60 or 70 more years of the dollar. You know what that's going to do to Bitcoin? The billions are going to turn to trillions. That means that regular people are going to have more money than governments.
Fuck.
Because their money is inflating. It's going down in value. Bitcoin's going up in value. Do you understand why when you have money you can't fuck with, it's like having a nuclear weapon in your pocket and telling the guy, go ahead and fuck with me and I'll blow you up.
Mm.
That's kind of how we see it. And that's why we're brazen, brash. We're just like Paul Revere. We will shoot at your redcoats. We're very confident. Why? Because we've done the hard diagnosis. We've done the deep dive. We get what the game's going on, and we don't fucking trust anybody. What do Bitcoiners tell you all the time? Verify, don't trust. That's the savage. That's what I want you to get across from me, and I want you to find people in Australia that have that mindset. I don't care if they have Bitcoin, because it may turn out that I may send a fucking submarine over to you someday and pick all of you fucking up and bring you to El Salvador. That's the truth. Because we're going to have that capability. Right now, it sounds crazy, but it's not going to be crazy much longer.
No, look, I don't think it sounds crazy at all. And I think that mindset is definitely growing in popularity. And that's in the echo chambers that I sort of reside in. That's exactly where people's mindsets are at. And I think forming that ideal, or sort of getting the structure correct, is super important. And yeah, and I think it probably had to start yesterday, but I do think that people are really moving towards all of that. I think, it's probably for another podcast, but how to create a system within the system is kind of like still a mystery.
Well, I will tell you that I can tell you where it should be in Australia. It should be in Queensland. It should be up in that forest that's 180 million years old. Why? Because it's the most sustainable place. Remember, 70% of your country's a desert. Mm-hmm. If you live in a desert part, it's going to be really easy for the technocrats and the bankers to fuck you. So guess what? You go to the place where there's tons of seafood, there's a lot of water, and there's good forests where you guys will be able to. I mean, that's exactly. If I was going to stay, the place I wouldn't be is fucking Tasmania. Yeah. And I wouldn't be in Sydney, or what's the other fucking place?
Yeah. Wherever. Yeah.
Yeah. The east and west coast of your continent, fuck that. I'm out. But you need to think about the north part. Mm-hmm. I know no one likes Darwin. It's the north part, but on the west side. But Cairns and all that shit up there where that forest is, dude, that's, if I'm Australian, I'm fucking selling my condo in Sydney and fucking moving straight there.
Really? Everyone's moving to the Whitsundays. Yeah. Nice. All right, Jack, it's been a pleasure to talk to you once again. You're always a wealth of knowledge, and I appreciate your depth and length of knowledge that you go to. So I appreciate you. We'll have to circle back and talk about all the other questions that I had for you about health, but it'll be great to circle back sometime in the future. But I wish you well. I look forward to hearing more from you soon, and I'll talk to you soon, okay?
All right, take care, Adrian. It was nice seeing you again.
Take care. See ya.
All right, bye-bye.